to what extent the tribal government plays a role in that. And in a previous slide, I asked that open-ended question of, should a tribal official be involved in engagement, and if so, to what extent? Well, there's things that you can do. You can put those meetings on live, you can give notice of the meetings, you can put the other information up there on a website, but at some point you have to be self-confident in your own governance that you know people are going to talk, and that part of engagement is that they're going to say terrible things that you disagree with, but that's part of the whole, process too. And so I don't advocate having a blog on the tribe's website where people can do that kind of banter. But I do advocate having a place on your website that may be community pages where people could say, I have this Facebook page and it's called Citizens for Tribal Accountability and you can go to it here. But let everybody do that. But let that be something that you click on and it takes you completely off of the tribe's website so that there's no question that it's not the tribe's mouthpiece and you're going to somebody else's private page. But you have to have the self-confidence to let those kind of conversations go if you're really serious about trying to engage them. But I think that the idea of the comments section on a tribal website where you can turn that into a Facebook, no. Because it's going to get inflammatory and it's going to look to the outside that it's the tribal government sanctioning that. And then when you get people from newspapers externally or whatever, it's going to look like you have a whole lot more internal strife when you just have tribal members that are bantering. But you've got to let people know where they can go have that public free speech, but not the tribal government's website. That's my personal opinion. And there's enough blogs and Facebook and Twitter and that kind of stuff out there that those kind of conversations can happen in private spaces. But you don't have to hide the fact that they're there. Okay. Freedom of information laws and policies. I mentioned the travel as an example because that was one place that I see it happening both in state and tribal areas. But you've already done a pretty good job of getting externally tribal court opinions, constitution, laws and policies, administrative orders, and that kind of stuff up on your website. Of course, you have a whole lot more to put up there, but it's a start. Do you have a Freedom of Information Act on the books right now? Okay. And do people use it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And how labor intensive is that? Is there one person or two people who are just in charge of doing FOIA?
We have a dedicated person.
Okay. And are they keeping up enough that things get done pretty quickly?
We have the 3 branches, so each branch has one.
Each branch has one. Okay. You might just take a look at that and see where you could, for efficiency's sake, streamline that. And if you get those repeated requests that are always coming in, why not just put that stuff out there, right? If it really is that you don't mind people seeing it, it sure would save time and money just to put some things out there as a preemptive measure so that your reply could just be click here, click here.
We do that, and we'll channel them first to the website. And we do try to accommodate electronically rather than, hard copies. So we do channel them first to the website.
Now, the database is really expensive, the one I mentioned, but once you get it out there, there's an initial startup cost, but then beyond that, that really helps with cutting down on FOIA requests if they grow out of control, to have that kind of database of the kinds of things that you would plug in there. And then final is this public versus targeted information. I do think that you want to think about audience as being much more broad than just tribal members, for the reasons that I talked about. But I do think that having some sort of mechanism where you can send private emails, not the best, but some sort of a mechanism where tribal members could log on to see certain things, or there's protected information that only certain audiences get. For instance, in your tribal election code, what kind of information can the candidates get actual access to for their outreach purposes? Can they have a voters list? Okay. Can they have phone numbers, emails, or just the name of the voter? Addresses. Okay. Maybe putting additional content in that with a no-call list could be helpful. There's always the perception when it comes to tribal elections that incumbents naturally have access to information on voters lists that others don't. And that might not be a problem here, but it's something prolific that I've seen in other tribes, that a voters list might just have the names of people or names and address, but somehow the tribal chairman is going to get access to emails and phone numbers and that kind of stuff, and that's the perception. We see it everywhere. And if that's the case, you know, it's those types of overt gestures of making sure that everybody has the same information that can really go a long way in terms of the community's perception that somebody is or isn't hiding involved. Yeah.
I don't know if we've done it in a number of years, but we used to print a tribal contact list that had addresses, phone numbers, so maybe it had emails. Can we still do that?
It's not a direct.
And does everybody get a copy of that?
We have to buy it.
But you know, that could be little gestures like that. Put that on the website and give your people a passcode to it or something, so that they have, and then you save on the mailing cost, but they feel like they're getting something added value. It's almost like the Bar Association of professional organizations. What am I getting for being a member? Well, maybe part of that is this special access to information that not everybody else has, that even if it's a tiny little baby step, it doesn't mean that much. It's a gesture toward the people that would be well received. My last point, I'm getting to the last two slides here. I just think that being as interactive as possible and thinking about really how people communicate. Social media and Facebook and Twitter and all of that, I don't know if you've used it yet, but you're going to get way more hits on something like that than you ever do on a website, just because people are a lot more mobile. And it's not just the 20-year-olds doing it, it's the 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds, and you really will reach a lot of people. So I would suggest that things that you do on a regular website, that you really employ that kind of thing too, because I know looking at the hits on various websites versus social media, it's usually a 4-to-1 more hits on a social media thing for the exact same content, just because that's rolling through their eyes where they don't have to go look for it. And then finally, a couple of long-term concerns. I think I've hit most of these, but here's something that concerns me about some federal court opinions as of late. There's this perception of narrowing tribal sovereignty and narrowing tribal jurisdiction, that really the only reason, and this is the external people saying this, the only reason that a tribe has powers is to control their internal situation, and they should have jurisdiction over things that still retain their Indian character. And that's such an offensive term, but you actually see that in Supreme Court cases where the Supreme Court, looking at whether the tribe ought to have zoning powers or not, the court is very comfortable if a tribe zones a forest or zones a recreational area. They're very uncomfortable if a tribe zones a commercial area, because it's their notions of what a tribe is supposed to do, or what a tribe is supposed to look like, or what a reservation is supposed to look like. And I'm sure, given just the reality of everything around here, y'all are very familiar with that argument, right? But it is something that we all have to be very mindful of, is that sovereignty is tied to this external idea of what a tribal government is and what kind of powers they have over people. And so if you don't take charge of defining that for yourself, then the perception out there is going to control the reality. And so to tie that into my very first part of this discussion, if you have 4,000 tribal members and only half of them are engaged, or only a quarter of them are engaged, the outside world is going to look at you increasingly like this small little subset of people. And if that's not growing and that's not fully engaged so that it's powerful, then the outside world looks at your sovereignty and says they ought to have sovereignty consistent with what it is exactly they're doing. And the more that it's a couple of people or small branches of people engaged in the government process, the easier it is for sovereignty to just be stamped out, because it's not going to impact that many people, right? And what they're doing is so minute, to get around that is not going to be very dramatic. And so I do think that, getting back to my first point of we can't just be as good as our neighbor government, we have to be better than, is because they're not dealing in the local county or with the state the kind of pressures we are of constantly having to say, yes, the government's strong, it's accountable to the people, people's rights are being preserved. And it is completely unfair, but it is almost like a mom saying, well, you gotta be that much better, you can't just be good, you gotta be that much better. And I think that if we think about our roles as tribal citizens and tribal officials in that way, for fairness or not, that's what it's gonna take to sustain what we have now, and particularly to grow it, is that you've gotta think about the numbers. And if your people are not gonna be fully engaged, what other people around you can you engage through public dissemination of information that will get you the allies that you're going to need when that comes back up again? Okay? All right, so with that, I will leave you these slides, the PowerPoint that you can keep to add to the video. And my time is up, but I'll take a question or two if you have any thoughts. Or I'll happily go get another cup of coffee. Thank you.